Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Life by Design podcast. On this week's episode, I speak with men's coach, Evan Spargo. Evan guides high-achieving, empathetic men to experience fulfillment and freedom in their life and relationship. In this week's episode, expect to learn about getting in your own way, shame and how it shows up in our lives, what freedom looks like for a man, social anxiety, and much, much more. Enjoy the episode. Now, guys, before we start this week's episode of the podcast, I want to talk to you about the Life by Design Mastermind. The Life by Design Mastermind is the mastermind for go-getters and high achievers who are looking to create a more successful, fulfilling, and balanced life by design. If you're serious about transforming your life, achieving your goals, and living a life on your terms, then the Life by Design is your golden ticket. Head over to the show notes and click on the link for more details about the program. Evan Spargo, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here, Blake.
Mate, how many times have you been on this potty?
I'd say maybe 4 or 5 times, but this is my first solo potty, so I'm pretty excited, actually.
I think you've taken the lead as most podcast episodes.
And that's a badge of honor.
It's good to have you here. Mate, lots for us to talk about today. Very different angle to the one that we normally go when all the boys are on. So as a solo episode, can you give the guys a 60 to 90 second spiel of who you are and what's got you to where you are today?
Yeah, I'd love to. So I'm a men's coach and I help specifically high-performing empathetic men to free themselves of burden and anxiety so that they can experience freedom and fulfillment in their lives and relationships, to put it into a nutshell. And I was that man. I was the high-performing empathetic man who struggled with anxiety his whole life, carried heaviness, shame, and constantly just got in my way. And after years of doing the work and putting myself through as much modalities and all these kinds of things, I figured out what was in the way. And I went through this beautiful process of healing those things, stripping back the layers and finally getting out of my way so I can create the life that I want and attract the relationship of my dreams, which I'm now living, which is amazing. And so I help men do the same.
Do you think the average person knows that they're in their own way?
No. The average person, especially guys, will fall into a subtle victim mentality of, well, it's much easier to blame other people. It's much easier to blame life circumstances. This happened to me in childhood, or this person's against me, and this kind of thing. And it's much easier to sit in that victim mentality rather than take responsibility of the position that I'm in right now. It's actually on me. It's actually my responsibility. I actually created this, and a lot of guys don't want to face that. They don't want to face that they actually sabotage themselves, and hence it's easy to look for external reasons why and shy away from this kind of self-ownership, this work.
Victim's such a big part of society, and yet for many of us, we can't see ways in which we are being a victim. What did you have to uncover, or what blind spots did you have when it came to playing that kind of victim role?
Yeah, I'd have to just stop and do an analysis of my life and look at how am I actually going? Where are my goals? How am I progressing towards them? And if I haven't been making any progress, there's something going wrong here. There's something must be addressed. There must be an issue. And so it's being real with yourself, doing an analysis of where you are, whether it's quarterly, monthly, some people it's yearly, some people it's never, to actually look at, well, how am I going in the direction that I'm going? And being honest with yourself. And I had a lot of every part of my life, there was always something struggling, and that made me look at, well, what it needs to be addressed. I remember when my relationships weren't working and I got out of my last relationship, I sat down and wrote down all the things that went wrong in that relationship, the ways that I didn't show up the way that I would have liked to, and went to work on that. And then when it comes to business, same thing, what's working, what's not. Being real with how I'm actually traveling and progressing towards what I want. So your results is a reflection of those blind spots. And so that not having the results that we want makes us look at, well, where am I actually going wrong, or what needs to be addressed here, rather than looking around and thinking, well, that's their fault. Someone didn't give this opportunity to me, or, I'm here because mum and dad did this to me when I was young, all that kind of thing.
It's such a beautiful and brutal gift from the universe. The real-time assessment of where you're at. Because all you have to kind of do is look at the results that you're getting, and it gives you really good insight into where you're at. But yet people get caught in stories. Oh, I'm 25 kilos overweight. Oh, I must be big boned. My bank account's empty. Maybe I'm not manifesting properly. Like, pain is often the price that you need to pay for honesty in that first situation. But it's part of the reason people won't even look into it. Is that what you found as well?
Absolutely. I believe that pain governs us. So all our behaviors and our action is around pain. It's the avoidance of pain and seeking of pleasure. And so what I notice, especially in doing this work myself and working with other men, is that when our actions are motivated by this pain, we'll do anything possible to avoid this pain, and that's usually what will take us off course. That's what usually will sabotage ourselves, because we're not willing to face that initial pain. And we look at most of the men out there, is they're looking for ways to numb, because there's pain there that they're unwilling to look at and can continue to avoid. And so because the pain is so overwhelming, it's much easier to go have a drink, get on drugs, porn, sex even, all these different ways to alleviate the pain. And the problem is, it will go away for a bit, then it comes back, and then they live with this pain, and then they take it out on people around them. They create dysfunctional behaviors and ultimately create scenarios in their life that they do not want. And then that's when we get into the position of the victim mentality. It's like, why is this happening to me? Well, mate, it's because there's pain that you're unwilling to look at, and you're creating self-sabotaging behaviors in order to avoid this pain. So the cycle continues. And this is what I'm noticing as I go deeper and deeper into this work and more guys come into my world. And so when we can help a man look at the pain, and we look at the pain ourselves, realize it's actually not as painful as we think it is. But in our mind, for some reason, we're shit scared of it. But when we get into the pain and actually feel it, on the other side of that is freedom. Freedom to make new choices, new decisions, freedom to actually feel the way that we want to feel. And that's the question, why do so many men in particular avoid that? And that's what I'm here to kind of discover and help men through.
What have you found when it comes to men and pain? And the reason I speak to that, obviously you and I have spent a lot of time working with blokes, is for many, there's a lack of awareness around the pain. They can see patterns that aren't necessarily working for them. You gave the examples of porn and drugs and alcohol and gambling, things like that. But where does someone even start to potentially look at, okay, I've got a dysfunctional behavior? I guess that's probably the place to start. Where is that stemming from? Like, even if you use yourself as an example, and having known you for the last 3 years, I've seen, a wild transformation from you. What was required for you to see your own pain?
Yeah, there's a couple of ways of doing this. Number one, as we spoke right at the start, was if I'm not getting my results, there's a place to start looking at. If I'm not getting what I want and not moving towards it, well, then there's something that's blocking me. Right? And that's an unconscious block that we can start to look at. The next one would be, what are the patterns that keep re-emerging? And a very common one is for single men who keep attracting the same type of woman, same type of relationship, and thinking, why the hell am I attracting the same person? Why do I attract the same boss? Why do I attract the same type of work when they keep changing careers? It's looking at, what are these repeating patterns? What's my part in this? If something keeps repeating itself, if I'm constantly broke, I'm constantly dating these types of women who aren't right for me, this gives you an avenue to actually look at yourself and think, well, what's my responsibility in it? Because the common denominator is me. I'm always the one who's in these positions. So looking at ourselves and thinking, well, what am I doing to create this? So just being being able to stop yourself and pause and look at it and reflect births self-awareness. And that's what we need to start with, is to be self-aware of these things. And then noticing as well the behaviors that create unwanted feelings in our life. For me, it was alcohol was really big for me. So I would drink myself to paralytic states every weekend, and then I'd feel deep shame for the next 2-3 days. And I would be like, oh, this is just normal feeling like this. And I would be in denial that my drinking was the problem. Yet I allowed myself to feel so shit for the next few days. And when I started to go, hey, I don't want to feel like this anymore, then I realized, oh, okay, it's my drinking that's a problem. And then that's what led to me of like, what's underneath the drinking? Well, underneath the drinking is I don't feel free to be myself. I need alcohol to feel good about myself. I need alcohol to feel peace and relief. So then that was the avenue to realize, well, how can I create relief? How can I feel ease and freedom in myself? And so I went to work on that. So there's different avenues, and all of it comes back to our behaviors, our patterns, and what's the reality of our life that we keep creating and attracting and drawing.
That's so fucking weird when you talk about that, because I just didn't know. I never knew that version of you at all. It's so wild to think that that was how you used to do life. What changed for you, and what do you see change for men? The reason I ask that is there's a lot of comfort in seeking what is familiar, and even if it's really dysfunctional, e.g., drinking yourself to that state, it is familiar. So what needed to shift for you, and what did you find in the early stages of shifting? Because that initial shift for a lot of people can be uncomfortable when they're kind of shifting into something new and the unknown.
Yeah, there's a couple of variables here. The first one is I just no longer wanted to be in pain. So there was so much pain that came from drinking, and porn was the same thing as well. Every time that I drink and every time I watch porn, it would be a shame spiral. So I'd be like, have the event, and then the next day or two, I'd be in deep shame, and then I'd feel guilty, and I'd want to hide away from the world. I wouldn't want to show my face. I'd be like, what the fuck did I do last night? Or I just felt disgusting after watching whatever. And so I made a decision that I didn't want to feel like this anymore, because it was destroying my self-worth and my happiness. And at the same time, it was stopping me from working, stopping me with energy to do the things that I want to do that will help me get ahead and draw the things that I want in my life. So that was the first step. It was like I made a decision I didn't want to feel like this anymore. And then I started to, as I said before, is look at what is the underlying feeling that I'm either escaping or trying to avoid. And that was not feeling comfortable in my own skin. And so hence why surrounding myself with people who are not judgmental. And that's when momentum was a big part of my development, is being surrounded by men who are on the same journey, where I can be fully myself and not have to feel judged. Because I know that drinking was a big thing for me. Was like, I felt like an outsider as a man most of my life. And that in order for me to relate to other guys and to bring my best self to them was to drink, because it numbed all these other parts of me that were actually my greatest gifts, but I needed to bring myself to the level of everyone else. And that was my way of kind of interacting and feel that sense of belonging. And, you know, I was brought up in the footy culture. So I wanted to be like everyone. I wanted to be one of the boys. I wanted to be one of the popular guys in the footy team and the best players and this kind of thing. And so that's the track that I chose to go down. And as I surrounded myself with healthier men, I was just like, well, I don't need to be like that anymore. I get to be myself. I get to be accepted for being myself. I get to feel great about myself being surrounded by other men and who are pushing themselves to be better. And I was like, where have you guys been? And so that's why the group and yourself and Genoa and was such a big part of my development, getting out of this. And yeah, and the next thing was environment. So the men's group, and then a healthy relationship as well. So being with such a conscious and beautiful partner that breathes, you know, we just breathe this healthy life, this life of growth and fulfillment. And when you're surrounded by people who want the best out of themselves, who hold themselves at a high standard, all those other behaviors start to fall away. And you want to hold yourself at a high accountability, a high standard. And so that's where the process that I took over time, taking self-responsibility. I wanted better for myself, the environment stuff I put in, and I just found ways to be more comfortable in my own skin. And it sounds really cliche and so simple, but the more that you can just be unapologetically yourself, everything just starts to shift. When you make that decision, I'm just going to be me, regardless of who I'm around or what judgment I receive, things start to fall in place. It's so simple, but it is so true.
The environment's massive. And if you look at kind of NLP neurological levels of change, the environment's the base. And I think that's a really, I mean, we kind of all know, you know, the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, and that kind of gets thrown around kind of pretty freely. But I think even when you're looking at something like rehab and those that struggle with rehab, it's often because, you know, you take them out of rehab and they go back to the same environment. What do you remember being the internal dialogue for you in, I guess, the old environment versus the new? You know, you kind of spoke about needing, or yeah, I think you used the word needing instead of wanting to drink to kind of relate to other guys. But what do you feel the difference both in, let's say, former relationships and the current relationship with Breezer, and also former environments and current environments in terms of the internal noise, what you should do, what you're meant to, and what kind of comes more freely and naturally for you now?
Yeah, I'll start with the previous environment. I just remember walking into a room of where it's the guys or in a social setting, anxiety hitting me and just thinking, how am I going to get myself in this conversation? What am I going to talk about? Just nervous and waiting for like an invitation to come in and talk, and just thinking of ways of how I can become a chameleon to what the conversation. And it's like, I was such a people pleaser as well. You know, I'm a recovering kind of nice guy. For those who not understand what that, have read the book, No More Mr. Nice Guy by Robert Glover. And I'd be a chameleon to every group. So if that group was talking about footy, I love footy, but I'd be talking about that. If they were talking about, you know, whatever that is, I would mold myself to talk about that as well and jump on their side. And my strategy was, if I was to please other people, then they would like me. This would reduce the chance of rejection and criticism, which was too painful for me. And then I'd feel safe in myself. And what helped that was alcohol. That helped me feel safe. It helped me to please others even more. And what I learned was I was totally ignoring my intuition of like, hey, these aren't your people. That, hey, this is not you. And so this reflected in my relationships as well, my old relationships, in how could I be a type of man that this woman will want and like, rather than how can I be the best version of myself? How can I be the best man? It was like, how can I mold myself and be the type of man that this woman wants? And so in the first 6 months, easy. You can put on this mask and it's easy, right? You do all the right things. You do all the things to impress. You go out above and beyond. And it gets to a time, 6 to 8 months, where you're just exhausted and the masks come down. They see you for who you really are. And they're like, what the hell is this? And that's when I was just, you couldn't keep up the facade anymore. And then who I truly was starting to come out. And it was like, it's just like they weren't prepared for it. And you can continuously try hard to maintain that mask, but then you fall back to who you really are. And because I hadn't integrated who I really was, it was coming out in very dysfunctional ways. Enormous shame spirals whenever I thought I did something wrong, getting so triggered by criticism, any feedback that I received. It was really tough. Whereas now I walk into a room, especially with the beautiful crew that we have up here in Byron and GC, I just feel ease. And I walk in and you give everyone a hug, and it's just like you're straight into, you know, what's lighting you up today? You know, how are you trying to take on the world? You know, these are the type of conversations that I've just craved my whole life. Like, I was such a deep, introspective, sensitive, empathetic guy, but there was no room for that in the environments that I was back in the day, you know, in my 20s. Whereas now it gets embraced and I get to feel at ease. And in this relationship now with Bree, I've never felt more free. I've never felt more happy. I've never felt more fulfilled. I've never felt more empowered. And it's like, I get to be so safe to be myself. And when you are so safe to be yourself, the world opens up to you. And this process, something I want to mention is that when guys start in this process, it's going to be lonely for the first while, the first period, because more often than not, there's not many around you doing the same thing. Hence, the environment really affects you. But I guarantee when you trust to be yourself and you keep working at it and release these shackles, your tribe will appear. I guarantee it. They will appear. But you've got to stay the test of time, because there will be periods where you will feel lonely. And I know that you felt that before when you're going through that transition period. But then on the other side of it is a freedom and a safety with other people that you've never experienced before and that you've always longed for, which I'm now blessed to have.
We've had a lot of good conversations over the last 3 years. I think one of the ones that I remember the most was me, you, and Rory were talking about the things that were critiqued and criticized in former relationships, and now the things that are celebrated. And we're pretty intense characters at the best of times, the three of us, and a deep desire to just like get the most out of ourselves, dive into the deepest of personal development and all those things. And I can't remember exactly what you said, or I can't even remember exactly what Rory said, but in previous relationships, felt like that made me the oddball. And it was based on those environments. But I think it's, you've used the word freedom a lot in the last couple of minutes. I think one of the biggest freedoms, potentially even the biggest freedom that you can have, is the freedom to be yourself in a relationship. There's freedom of time, there's freedom of space, there's putting yourself in a position where you're financially free. There's so many different elements to freedom, and lots of freedom that I seeked in previous relationships, albeit, dysfunctional ways of freedom, which many blokes do. But the freedom to be myself in this relationship means that freedom isn't really a thought that I need to have. Has that been kind of your experience as well?
Yeah, a really good point that you bring up. Every bloke, whether they know it or not, their main driver is for freedom. For women, it's love and relationship. For men, it's freedom, purpose and freedom. All men want freedom. What gets mixed up about freedom, and unfortunately, this is an experience for a lot of men, is that when they get into a relationship, they lose freedom. And this is a really big misconception. When you're with the wrong person, or I wouldn't say the wrong person, the misaligned person, then yeah, that's the case. But when you are with the most conscious and connected and aligned person in relationship, you actually gain more freedom. And the freedom that you talk about, which you were spot on about, is the freedom to be yourself. When you're in the right relationship, you have the freedom to be yourself, and it actually empowers you to experience new parts of yourself, new skill sets, and you look differently at life. More of life opens up to you. That's what I believe that true freedom is. Freedom can be seen as, especially for a man, like, I want to be on my own. I don't want to be constricted by other people. I want to be able to do whatever I want, which is all fine and well if that's what you want. But then you're missing the point of life, is our relationships and our connections, our community. And when you get to do life with someone else and to both experience freedom in that relationship, it is the most beautiful experience of life. And it's so important that in order to experience that, you need to feel free in yourself first. Every man, ideally, before they enter a relationship, is how can you be fully free in yourself first? Because when you do that, you will attract someone the same, and you will attract someone who loves you for who you are truly, rather than the masks that you put on, which I used to do. And I found out in those past relationships, they were attracted to the masks that I created. And so as soon as they came off, attraction was gone. And that's when there was conflict. That's when the shit hit the fan in those relationships. So in terms of freedom, we need to redefine freedom into the freedom to be yourself in all situations. Yeah.
It's interesting, the mask bit. I've kind of sat with this thought a fair bit, having, I think probably unconsciously I'm still wearing some masks that I'm unaware of. No doubt psychedelics will help me kind of blow those apart. But it's interesting, the piece around masks Because if you're really attuned to that, there's still an element of loneliness that comes with that, because the person that you're with or the friendship group that you're around have drawn to love the mask, love that version. So behind you, there's still an emptiness, there's still a loneliness, because the true you isn't being seen. And one thing I realized, I don't know if this shows up in your world, is I put a lot of blame on, here we go, victim. I put a lot of blame on those people not seeing me, but yet they kind of did. They were just seeing the mask. I wasn't prepared to show the true version of me. So I was feeling like I wasn't seen, heard, and understood. And yes, there's a co-creation, but I also wasn't really taking responsibility for the fact that I wasn't showing them the true version of me as well, which meant I was always a little bit lonely because I was sitting behind that mask. Is that something you've experienced as well?
Yeah, definitely. I guess when I was growing up in my 20s, I kind of just resigned to the fact that my true self wasn't going to be revealed. And so I stayed in the environments that were unhealthy. And yeah, I felt lonely. And I thought there was no other way to get around this. And so you succumb to your circumstances, and you kind of live with the fact of there's almost some resentment as well of I don't get to be truly seen. You know, there's something wrong with the world, or there's no good people out there in the world. And so I'll just keep fronting this mask. And then when I'm in my own space, you know, I'll quietly weep and just feel a lot of shame and yeah, dissatisfaction about my life. And that was there for such a long time. And I think this can be actually a big excuse for guys to not put themselves out there and to remain small and to remain lonely. It's such an easy excuse to go, I'm in this environment now where no one's conscious, no one's doing their work on themselves. And so I can't do it. There's no one, I'm lonely. There's no one else around me who's doing it. So this is who I am, and this is what's going to happen. I have to put on a mask. I have to live this life. When really it's about how can you have the courage to start to reveal who you are. And yes, there might be some people who aren't aligned with that and may leave. But then, as I said earlier, the more you trust in revealing who you really are, your tribe will come. I guarantee it. But yeah, it was such a good point that it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy of being lonely. It's like, I want to prove that I'm lonely. I'm going to continue being lonely because there's no one else out there who could be my mate or who could go in this life with me. You know, and you see that with guys wanting to attract women as well. It's like, oh, there's no women out there. There's no women on my level or whatever. Bullshit. It's just you're not willing to be yourself and put yourself out there. So there's a lack of courage as well that goes around.
And I would potentially add to that if you continue to attract dysfunctional men or women, whatever it is that you're interested in, you might want to take a deeper look as to why you continue to attract them as well. Mate, you used the word anxiety a bit, and I know, you know, you've experienced moments of social anxiety in the past. What have you noticed about your shift in social anxiety as you've shifted your environment? And the reason I say this, and I think you and I have had some conversations about this, I used to think I had social anxiety, but what I realized was it was just probably more a misaligned relationship. I haven't felt socially anxious in 4 to 5 years. So it was really interesting me thinking I had social anxiety. And then when I changed my environment, all of a sudden it's gone. What have you noticed about your relationship with social anxiety?
Yeah, it was rampant early on. So in my 20s, absolutely, it was there. Hence why the drinking helped me curb the social anxiety. I remember going to like a karaoke event in my early 20s, and I was so nervous. I had like 4 shots of tequila before I went. Like that's how bad my social anxiety was. Like I'd have pre-drinks before the actual event because I was just shit scared and shit nervous. And yeah, not a good way to be, because that's hence why I ended up paralytic most nights because of that, because of the social anxiety. I just couldn't do it. I just didn't think, I had this belief it wasn't interesting enough, or I wouldn't be able to connect with people, that they wouldn't get me. They'd think I'm weird, I'm too deep, too sensitive. Yeah, that's the beliefs I had around myself. And then that created a lot of anxiety. Fast forward to now, where the environment that I'm in, every second person I get to talk to is a beautiful, deep, introspective, quality conversation. And I thought I was really introverted, really deeply introverted. But then I'm like, put me in the group that I'm in now. You can't shut me up. And I'm like, where's this come from? I didn't know this part of me. Like in my relationship with Bree, both of us we think we are introverts, but we don't shut up with each other. I've never talked more in my life, and I love it. I feel like I can express myself, and it comes down to environment. And so that is social anxiety now. Yeah, you might get a bit nervous sometimes when there's a big group. That's normal. Well, for me, it is. And then, but once you're in it, you're just like, oh, how good is this? I'm surrounded by my people. And the common denominator here is just the safety in the people around you, the safety in that they can hold you and that you don't feel judged. And that I love being in a group of people who will actually pause and listen to you without trying to like change the topic or is this too much for me or try to over talk to you or just dominate the conversation. It's so cool just to be actually heard and to be held space, which I just never had growing up. Never had it at home. Didn't have it really, bar a few people in my 20s. And then once I've come up here, it's just like I get to have beautiful, open flowing conversations.
It seems so, I guess, obvious we should connect with people and we should have people around us. Like we're humans, we're designed for that. But it really is significant in terms of the people that have the skills to connect properly, deeply, like-minded people. And similar to you, I've been around much bigger groups of people, in particular when I was in Sydney, but felt like utter loneliness. And then I look at, you're coming for dinner tonight, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. I look at the group that we'll hang out with tonight, 10 people or however many come in for dinner. And I just know that I'll leave there feeling like full, seeing, epic chats. What are some of those skills that many of the, crew that we've got in our life, what are some of those skills that have you leaving that conversation going, fuck, that felt good, or I felt seen, or I felt like we connected properly? What are some of those skills? Because I feel like for a lot of people, you don't know what you don't know. And, in some of these environments that I, work with individuals, they can't make sense of why there's an emptiness in the conversation. So when you think about some of the crew that we're with tonight and some of the individuals within that, what are some of the skills that they've got that have you leaving those conversations going, that was fucking epic?
Yeah, that's awesome, the question that you've got there, because I'm reflecting now and all these guys have safety, and safety it's challenging to describe, but safety is that someone can listen to you in a non-reactive way and hold you in what you're saying fully. And that's combined with the ability to be present with you. You can tell when someone's present with you and they're not trying to divert the conversation, mold the conversation to them, constantly talk about themselves, that they can actually give you space to speak. That's such a big skill that not many people have. The ability to give someone undivided attention, presence, and hold them in whatever they are saying without reacting, without judging, without having to change anything about the other person. That's, I believe, the number one skill. Another one is just active listening, asking questions about yourself, asking them empowering questions. They genuinely want to learn. So I think this is intent. They have genuine intention with you to learn and listen about it. And the other thing is that you can sense an energy of self-responsibility. Someone who's willing to take responsibility for themselves, to call out when things aren't going well for themselves, or to own their shadows and their shortcomings, but also own what's going really well and to embody that. And so that's another skill in itself. So there's a couple of things that come to mind. And the last one's just energy. There's a clean energy about this person. And a clean energy is just, there's no hiding. You can tell when they're not hiding something. You can tell when they genuinely want to be there and be present with you and talk to you and get to know you. You can just feel the energy. I know it's a bit more woo-woo, but there's an energy that you feel from another person. It's a clean energy. And so there's about 3 or 4 the skill sets that you don't need to be extra special to have. They're all things that you can cultivate, and all comes from you doing the work on yourself. you learning about yourself, you constantly on this beautiful growth and healing journey. And I see the ones who work on healing themselves the most, the more present, more clean their energy, more intent that they have, and the more safety that they have to be around.
You spoke so well to some of those different communication skills. I think, and there's lots of skills that you can develop. Some are more challenging to acquire in terms of they take a little bit of time to kind of get your head around. I think even if you were to really simplify that as, something that people could take, that they could instantly implement into their worlds this afternoon. And when I think about, a lot of our crew, they're very good at being interested and not as fixated on being interesting. And that's a really, like, if you have a genuine curiosity and interest in understanding the other person, that'll always shine through as well. And I think about our crew, they're very good at that. Everyone's living interesting lives, and everyone's got kind of cool stories and cool things going on. But that genuine curiosity as to, hey, what's been going on, like, and a real depth and interest in each other is, I think, one thing that stands out as well.
Yeah, massively. You can tell when someone's genuinely interested in you. You really can. You can, as I said before, it's the intention behind their words and their attention with you, and their focus is, are they interested in you, or are they more focused on being interesting? Really interesting that you brought that up. And this is something for a lot of empathetic, introverted men that I work with, is that they have this belief that I need to be interesting in order to be liked and talked to. So a lot of introverted, empathetic men, they struggle to create conversations and put themselves out there, which is absolutely fine. Like, that's just the way that we are, and I was. And so they have this belief that we need to be as interesting as possible in order to gain attention. And so the focus goes onto them, trying to be as impressive and trying to do all these kinds of things and trying to be bigger and be in a certain way, rather than that people just want to be seen and heard. So they go away from their greatest skill set as being an introvert and being empathetic, being able to see another person, into what can I do to be more interesting? And so I've noticed this pattern in men wanting to go and be interesting and wanting to impress others and be a high achiever in order to gain attention and approval and to be liked, when really all they needed to do was to invest and be interested in other people, in the person that they're talking to. And some of the greatest skill sets of an empathetic, introverted man is the ability to fully see another person as they are, and to hold space for them, and to feel what they are feeling. Yet it's all about, how can I be more interesting? So being interested, the point that you bring up here, is such a key skill set to have, an intention to have when coming into conversation, especially with those who may struggle with social anxiety. If you're struggling with that, look at your environment. But if you're in the right environment, how can you get curious and interested about other people and start from there?
Brother, your work is magic and continues to be magic. For those that want to find out more about you, your programs, working with you, where is the best spot to send them?
Yep. So my website, evanspargo.com, and then on Instagram @evanspargo, and then LinkedIn, if you can just find me on Evan Spargo. So at the moment, I coach men, just men, one-on-one offering, but also my group program, The Ascension. This is a 12-month membership type of program. And I'm actually opening up the next iteration of it. And in the group program, it's basically for highly performing, high achieving, empathetic men, and helping them to basically heal themselves, right? So they can have a more they can experience freedom and more fulfillment in their lives and relationships. And we will focus on the 4 pillars of the Ascension, which is masculinity, mindset, embodiment, and relationships. So for those men out there who are listening, who are highly empathetic, who are high achieving, and resonate with the struggles that I've spoken to about before, this is the program that you get to do with other guys who are exactly the same, wanting to step into their greatest version of themselves. And so they're the 2 offerings that I've got, and I'm continually building on them. So it's really exciting. And by the time this podcast comes out, there'll be a new intake.
Beautiful. Brother, always good to chat.
Thanks, brother.